Hello, my name is Marcus Wilson. I'm a resident of the 10th Ward and my family here. I'm here today to interview Alicia Gibson for City Council.
And I am Alicia Gibson. I live in the Wedge and I'm running to serve as the Ward 10 City Council member.
So first I just wanted to say, thank you for coming in. I really respect you standing up for your beliefs and also standing up for the people. I feel like, leadership is very disconnected and there's so much divide in our community, including our leadership. So one of my commitments is being involved myself with things like this. So I wanted to hear a little bit more from you, specifically on like the divide and what we were discussing a little bit earlier. I also wanted to mention that I know Alicia, my family has known Alicia, and she scoots all around this little town, so I know her personally.
Yes, we are raising kids who are about the same age, and and we have Japanese American connection with your family. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, right. I mean, I was saying that last week while I was out door knocking, I ended up having to come home and take a nap because I just could feel the divide, right? And it's not even that I had any negative interactions. I very rarely have, negative interactions with people, but it's a very fraught time. I think that we're still living in trauma.
Yeah.
And so that's actually one of the reasons why I'm running. I don't know what it is about me, my temperament, why I was like born to be here. I don't know, but I always find myself like drawn towards trying to understand these really complex, conflict-ridden moments.
Sure.
I don't have that kind of stuff in my personal life. I stay very far away from it. But the first thing I did when I went to college was I studied peace and conflict resolution, and the apartheid had just ended in South Africa. So where everybody else was going to Europe for their semester abroad, where did Alicia go?
Yes.
South Africa, when they had the highest crime rate in the world, and everybody that knew me was like, this checks out. This makes sense in a weird way. And then, went to law school, which is all about how do you process trauma, process conflict.
Interesting.
And it was there that I actually, because I did a lot of federal Indian law, learned about kind of restorative practices, which is a really different way of thinking about conflict and moving through harm. And so that has kind of been more my trajectory. But I came here because I got a PhD at University of Minnesota.
Yes.
And my dissertation was the atomic bomb.
Yes.
So I have been thinking about, and I guess that there's a fire, I run towards it to put it out or to understand what's going on. So, so there's that kind of duality to me, where I don't like to feel that conflict. I don't like to be. I never want to be a person that is part of divisiveness, but I also am a kind of person that is drawn to that to try to help.
Yeah, very, very, very passionate. I've read a little bit about your mission. I got a chance to read a little bit about the other candidates as well. So yeah, and even your bookstore in Ohio and some other things, I was like, wow, you really get out there and work. So let's get into our area. Our specific area in the Uptown area. I know for me, it was one of the worst hit, during the riots and the pandemic as well. And so what I wanted to get into was, as a father and a person that's invested in our community, hearing about change is something that we always hear about, but then there's issues and things that are constantly neglected. So for your mission and what you plan to do if you're elected, what would you do on those notes of some of the most neglected issues of need in our area?
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way, and that's why I'm running. Sure. I haven't been building a resume to be a politician.
Sure.
Before I jumped in this race, I knew one politician, and that was just a neighbor who lived down the street.
Sure.
Right? But I, like you, the year and a half of crisis just really felt how so many people are being left behind,
Sure.
a real lack of leadership, especially leadership from the ground up, which is what I really feel very passionately about. Yeah. And so, I think, for us, Ward 10, let's start with the COVID and the pandemic. We had so many small businesses. This ward has had so many small businesses, and we have a lot of people in the industries like yours, which was fitness, but we have a lot of people in restaurant businesses, bartending, that kind of stuff.
Nail shops, hair shops.
Yeah. Shut down. It was completely all of the sectors that were destroyed. And so
30 plus year businesses.
Yeah. And so first of all, I think we need to take a pause on all of the city planning that is actually putting more pressure on those small businesses in this moment of continued crisis and driving more and more out.
Sure.
Right? So we need to stop and say, whoa, how is this city policy going to help or hurt this sector of the economy in this area that is already hurting so badly?
Right.
And then we need to really figure out how we support, continue to support, especially our small businesses, because that really is the engine of growth in this ward.
Absolutely.
And I, even as a candidate, what I did is I brought together, I had a Ward 10 summit, and I tried, everybody's super busy, but I did get people from different parts of our ward, because what we need to do is build constituent power.
Sure.
And we need people to be able to get together, and I tell their council member, whether that's me or somebody else, what the priority should be, right? Instead of somebody coming in and making assumptions.
Right.
And I heard a really good idea yesterday. I love just talking to people. And that's one of the things that I know, because I've been serving as the neighborhood association president for my neighborhood across the street over here.
Yeah.
And what I know from that is that people have good ideas, really workable good ideas. People that work here, people that live here. And I just talked yesterday with a guy who is a landlord. He's a person of color, Black man. And he was really, explaining with a very compassion about the people that rent from him, who are in the service industry, who have been, out of jobs, but he also has to pay his mortgage, and he said, well, what about if we had kind of a jobs program where small businesses would get subsidies for hiring youth? Because we're talking about crime too, right? For hiring youth and giving them jobs training, getting them off the street, giving them more productive things to do. Isn't that one of the things that we could do that would be a way to use our recovery money?
Absolutely.
And I was like, that's a brilliant idea, right? So that's really the reason why I'm running, is to empower the people who live here and work here with all of these great ideas.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that constantly comes into my mind too. It's inclusion, right? It's like less disenfranchisement. People that are invested in their community. I feel like there's a huge opportunity. Lots of people have ideals, and then there's people that are going to be in leadership that need to delegate where finances and things go to make these things really happen. Because I feel like it's our future that we're trying to fix, right? A lot of the problems that have been stemmed from many years. I mean, including Minneapolis. In fact, one of the things I wanted to get into was that Minneapolis has a history of bad policing, racism, and even residential segregation. And when you bring those things into the mix, you got people that can't afford to live in this area. They can't afford to rent in this area, and they're just workers. And so I feel that same need that he's talking about the programs and getting finances in places where people can kind of use them and build people up in the whole community, even the least what's the word for it? Privilege, and then where's the connection? So that kind of leads me to my next question. It's like, your intentions on using your power, if indeed you are elected, for the future, for real change, so his ideal, for instance, right? He's got this ideal. Let's implement that, and then let's figure out how that would actually turn into real change. So that would be my next question. Like, the intention is there. I hear the intention from a lot of the other candidates. I actually read their things too, and like I was saying. And my next thought in my mind begins to think,
how?
okay, yeah, how? Let me show me the change.
Yep.
Like, what is your plan? Not show me, but what's your plan for the change?
Sure. And that's why I think, for me, process is what I would like to bring is a kind of leadership on process, right?
Sure.
And so that process first is very grassroots based, listening to people, and then you connect them, like you were saying, to the resources. First of all, connect them to each other, because sometimes that's all you really need to do.
Absolutely.
And then otherwise it's connecting to process. So I am the only person running in Ward 10 who has a law degree. And frankly, that is about how you make policy work, at the government level. And I find that there's a lot of really good intentions that are being brought to City Hall, but they're not being followed through properly because they're not thinking about how do we legally make this happen, right? Because there is a box, and we got to figure out how to creatively work inside that box. So that's actually one of the big things why I want to run. So for example, here's two examples of specifically, issues around housing that you brought up, where people talk to me with good ideas, and then I thought about the constraints of the system and thought about a possible solution, right?
Sure.
One is the gap in Black home ownership.
Sure.
Right? This is one of we're like worst in the nation.
Absolutely.
And to me, I feel like that is one of the foundational gaps.
Sure, exactly.
That then goes
generational
towards,
too.
And it's a generational gap, right?
Yeah.
So I, had been thinking about this, and I thought, okay, we have this neighborhood association system that has these kind of financing structures that have operated for decades. That gave it was created when there was mass flight out of the city to incentivize and help people who stayed, and then also incentivize people coming back to build up that crumbling infrastructure. Small loans, they're not big loans.
Sure,
so I thought,
sure.
okay, wait a second. What if could we have a new category of loan at this system that is for African American and Native people?
Sure.
For down payment assistance.
Sure.
We could target it specifically to areas that were redlined, right? That would be a beginning.
Right.
Or it could be citywide. But the reason why it's important that we target like African American Native is because that is where we have an evidentiary record of housing discrimination.
Right.
And if we want something like that to make it through the courts,
right,
because that's where I'm thinking is
sure,
like, how do you make it stick?
Yeah.
Is that you're going to have to target it in a way that the harm matches the solution.
Right.
And I talked to some people and they're like, yeah, that could work. Another thing is land banking of affordable housing, because we know that we need more affordable housing. I did the research. South Uptown is actually nationally known as one of the most gentrified areas of our city now because of all of the recent development that went in there. And that was pushing out Black home ownership. That was one of those connections that they were making. So one of the things that I thought is, okay, I talked to experts again about naturally occurring affordable housing and the affordable housing crisis more generally, and they said we have to preserve all of the naturally occurring affordable housing that we can. That means housing that is out there that is not technically public assistance housing, but is been around long enough in the market that it is affordable for people.
Absolutely.
And so the idea I have is like, hey, let's use that neighborhood association system again, because I talked to partners who said there's money out there for us, the nonprofit developers, to buy this housing and to rehab it and to permanently keep it affordable. But the market moves quicker than what we can do because our financing takes longer. So then I thought, wait a second, what if we had pots of money spread out across the city? We could use the neighborhood association system, or we could do it differently, where the neighborhoods and community members could be empowered in being involved in the solution by jumping in when a building goes up for sale and trying to buy it. They permanently land bank it, so they change the deed for it, the constraints around the legal document on it, and then they transfer that to a partner, the nonprofit partner, when their money comes through. They refill the bucket, and now you got more money to do it again somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right? And that's not going to be, that's not going to solve all of our problems, but that is something we could do.
Right. We need to do many things to like really create ways to bring in that poverty gap. When you look at the average median income from African Americans versus everyone else, we're like way behind. Yeah. So that's what's causing many people to not be able to afford to be in certain areas, which goes to my other point, which is the jobs. The creating the jobs where people can actually work and not just work a part-time job and still have to pay the exact same pricing for things as people that are making half more money than them. So, when it comes to the jobs and including people in our area, I feel like the Ward 10 is very unique. It goes all the way down Lake Harriet, and then it comes all the way back over here where you do have a lot more apartments and people that are living in close proximity to people that own $1 million homes. So, when you look at people being financially sustainable in the same area that somebody else can have $1 million home, like how do those things work? So that's what makes me think about the jobs, and how do we get more, not just jobs for people, but programs for people, and having all that work together within our area. And literally in my mind, I'm really thinking about it being as an opportunity to make an example, because our area is one of the most hardest hit. So we got all these other areas that are worse off than us, but we can actually really make change, not just in this area, but be an example for this whole city. So I guess, that's what brings me to another one of my points. I had a family friend of ours. This goes back to like people being, excluded in the, everyone feels like we're all inclusive, but we're kind of not. He owns Blue Ox Bakery, and during the riots, he was actually helping some of the protesters after Winston got killed. He got threatened by the owner to the land he runs his business from home, and yet and still that's the only way that he really makes money, going to farmers markets or pop-up venues, and sure enough he gets threatened for trying to help people that are out trying to make change. So it just goes back to that same old thing. Like in our area we got lots of wealth, and then we have just a scenario where voices are trying to be heard, and yet and still they're not being included. So I guess my ultimate point is that I also want the feel of my candidate that I'm going to vote for to let me know that Minnesota's not going to just be the regular old Minnesota nice. We're actually going to be inclusive. Like that situation showed me that this person owns the land, so he threatens him to make him feel like, hey, you're not going to be able to work if you're helping these people, but at the same time he's helping people that are actually out there trying to get a message heard that is actually needed. And obviously Winston being killed is traumatic. I mean, that's another thing that I would like to get into later, but like, sure enough, in our area we've witnessed violence right here too. So I guess my next question would be like the inclusiveness, like including the disenfranchised, including the impoverished, including the people that that are worthy to be in this area, but do they necessarily fit in? Can they work somewhere? Can they live somewhere?
Yeah. So I mean, I hear a couple different things
yeah,
here.
There's two.
One of them is that there is really legitimate rage at the system because people have been promised reform, people have been promised change for so long.
Right. Our system is broken.
And it hasn't happened, right? And they're not really getting leadership that is giving them, ideas for actual reform that are non-chaotic and that can happen. So that is actually one of the things that I am trying to do.
Sure.
Right? And we also need to have trauma healing.
Sure, exactly.
Because we are still trapped in trauma. And a lot of what I saw going on in Uptown was trauma loop.
Right.
Was a trauma loop.
Yes.
People in trauma, and let's be honest, also causing some trauma.
Sure, absolutely.
To the people who are living there.
Right.
And other businesses that were there too that now had to close down.
Right.
So now the Uptown is still closed. All of those, because their businesses were targeted and people didn't want to come there. So it was trauma loop, and there's no right or wrong. I mean, that's legitimate. People who are suffering and are in pain, like what you mentioned, right?
Right.
So to me, that's one of the things that we've gotten wrong as a city. Last summer, our city council wrote legislation, passed an ordinance that we would have a year of citywide conversations around policing and safety, and it needed to also include healing.
Right.
And, I lived in South Africa in the 90s, as I mentioned, to understand the truth and reconciliation process. So I know how essential that is. When you have community trauma, you can't heal that without the community being together to do it.
Absolutely.
So what I would like to see is like precinct by precinct, kind of truth and reconciliation style commissions. Really that just means deep, meaningful conversations that are trauma informed and that are specific to that community. Because there's some areas of our city where there are more Hmong, people living there, and Somali American people living there, and African American, and the way that you communicate and the things that mean healing are kind of different in these different areas.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So we have to have that. Right? To me, that's what we have to have. The other thing that I hear you talking about is inclusion and how we are bringing in the people that really have been left behind in COVID, right? And so I think that a lot of that is also community-based, right? So the idea that the guy I talked to yesterday who said, let's have a jobs program where our small businesses get subsidies for hiring these people who are often left behind.
Absolutely.
And that way, because there's apparently a job shortage, like we can't get enough people, but then there are people who could use the training, right, to fill that need.
Absolutely.
So that's a good idea. When there was like that I-35 at 94 reopening, I went down there to celebrate with community, and I ran across a guy who is trying to start a program called Poverty Up. And what he wants to do is pay stipends to these kids who right now are busy tagging everything and, honestly causing very serious problems, but pay them to do the opposite, which is to clean up the area, right? To paint over graffiti, have an area that is for art. So they get paid to do art, community public art. That they get, they get training and get paid to create green spaces, to water gardens and to grow trees.
Yeah.
Right. And so that to me is that what, I read this in an article and I just loved it. well, actually, it was a podcast I was listening to, the life-affirming infrastructure of peace.
Yeah, like it.
That is what we need, and those kinds of programs are exactly what we mean by that.
Right.
Right.
I also just don't want the message to get lost about why people are out trying to spread the message of what's going on at times in this area, or actually happen in this area. And it's also our history. You know, I feel like part of this, you know, poverty has been as a result of, you know, our government, you know, and how things have played its way out into the point to where, you know, people are being counseled out. And that's one of the things I just wanted to make sure that it's like those voices, I don't want them to be counseled out. You know, our business, my wife's and I business, we were robbed as well. But at the same time, if people wanted to come out and voice their opinion, I would support that as long as they're not, you know, tearing things up or stopping our ability to run it. And I just feel like a lot of people, you know, they kind of went a certain way with that, just to hit on that note. And that's where I feel like as a community, we need to talk. I mean, it's like, hey, it's, you know, as long as you're not the problem, those voices should be heard. And I feel like that's one of the things that got lost with the protesting in the Uptown area. You know, so that, which actually brings me to another one of my points. You know, I know this is, you know, been on a lot of people's minds. And of course, we live here in Minneapolis, and you know, with my history with this, you know, it's very unique to be here because I was also in LA at the time of the Rodney King riots, you know, so and I know, you know, you posted something the other day about, you know, witnessing a robbery, and I know that must have been scary. And then the first thing I thought in my mind was that, you know, for many of us, like including me, you know, the police are the protector and the killer at many times, you know, so it's a very, you know, contrast ideal to be framed with, and thinking that, yes, we do want correct policing, but at the same time, we don't want to, you know, have it go in a way that doesn't really work for us. And I guess that's just kind of an encompassing, you know, in our whole area, because, you know, over the last year, of course, George Floyd was murdered, and then we had the big protests, and our city literally was on fire. So, which leads me to my next question again. How do you feel about, like, the policing, and not necessarily just the policing, but like safety policing in our area? Yeah,
you're absolutely correct. I mean, the status quo cannot continue.
Sure.
Right. And what I hear and what I think we need is policing, because actually the people, and this is what is showing up right now in our own data in our own city, the people who are hurt the most in the absence of policing are also, you know, Black, brown, indigenous people of color. And then on the other hand, right, the people who are hurt the most by over-policing or by impunity in policing are also those same groups of people. Okay, so that really is the crux of the issue. And so how I approach this is, I kind of did the research. I listen around, I listened to people in the community, I listened to expert voices. I was actually listening to a podcast on Black trauma and healing, and specifically with police brutality. And I should have looked up the name of the person who was, it was on the Minnesota Public Radio. She does a regular podcast. But anyway, they had they had the author of the book, My Grandmother's Hands, which is about, you know, the kind of racial trauma that is in the body. And it had chapters on how, you know, Black bodies move through that. And he uses the phrase white-bodied supremacy, and how white people move through that trauma, and also how police officers move through that trauma. Because this was a Black therapist who has a brother who's also a police officer, right? So I was listening to this podcast, and it had on there a woman who is an expert in criminal justice reform, and she participated in 2019 in almost a year's worth deep engagement with victims of police brutality and their families. There was a panel of 18 on this working group. It was like working group of deadly encounters with police. 13 of the people on that working group were Black or Native. And it included her, so people with PhDs, it included law enforcement professionals and victims, informed by the victims. And they came out with 28 recommendations that would apply to the entire state, not just to Minneapolis, because that's really the problem. I mean, what happened in South Uptown was not the Minneapolis Police Department. That was the federal marshals. So the thing that is the reality, is that we are policed at all times by many different levels of policing. federal marshals, county sheriffs, state highway patrol, our municipal, police department, other municipal police departments that come in chasing somebody, right? Like, it's a lot. We have Federal Reserve Police downtown, right? So they looked at comprehensive, meaning what are the changes that need to happen across the board to end brutality in policing?
Right.
And our chief signed on to that. And then that summer, he changed the oath of office for our police department to be in a more restorative, what I call restorative justice, according to restorative justice principles. And so I would like for us to look at, not to discard this work that was done, and for us to, if I'm a council member, I'll dust that thing off, and I will push the partners at the other levels and say, what are you doing so that policing, all the different levels of policing in Minneapolis and our city is what it should be? And then what are we doing in our police department, Chief Arredondo, to follow through on these recommendations? For us, the biggest thing is the union contract. That really is the main sticking point right now. And if the union, they have new union leadership, and so coming from a restorative framework, coming from, peace and conflict resolution and diplomacy, I want to leave open that door and say maybe with new union leadership, they're ready for a reset. Maybe.
Because, the thing is that, ultimately for me as an African-American male, peace and safety is something that I am concerned of, and the disproportionate numbers still since George was murdered, we've had a few more specifically black men killed. So I would love to see those things come to fruition, laws change and what's the word? Change, because we have a lot of opportunity, but again, to me it goes back to those intentions and actually things falling through.
So the next point is, if they don't want to accept those changes, then we're going to sue them.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. That's what they did in Cincinnati, Ohio, where they had a very similar circumstance happen, where a young black man was murdered by police in 2001, and they had a history of brutality. They had a police chief that wanted reform, but the union had been pushing back against it. They had an investigation into their policing practices. They used the report to sue NAACP, and ACLU sued them. Also the other really important thing is they had a very similar legal jurisprudence around collective bargaining. So their state laws were just as strong as ours.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
you can't change the name of a department and get rid of the contract. That's not going to happen,
Sure.
right? Because we have a strong union laws. That was the same in Ohio. So that's why it's a very good, model for us.
Right.
The court overturned that particular union contract because they made a good case of a pattern and practice of discrimination, which of course we will be able to make here in Minneapolis, right? We've got 2 ongoing investigations too.
Yeah.
And then so the court undid that. They had to adopt the community policing reforms that their chief wanted, that experts wanted. And then they had the Federal Justice Department stick around to implement it. They had a 70% decrease in the use of force.
Wow.
They also had a decrease in crime. So it wasn't because there was just lawlessness that was let out on the street, right? That it was like all of a sudden there's no police brutality.
Absolutely.
And so that is what we can do. So that's what I'm saying. I am not just talking about intentions.
Sure.
I am saying there are things that we can do that actually change what it is that we all want to change.
Right.
St. Paul just announced that they have after a 5-year change in the way that they do use of force.
Sure.
So if they have to use force, they change their techniques. They saw something, I wish I could remember the percentage. In that 5 years, they've seen a 40% decrease in the use of force. I would like for us to do better, but that's not nothing.
Yeah. So, and I appreciate you saying that. To me, it's the intention of all of us, especially leadership, to make sure that this connection stays. Because, like I said, as an African American male resident in the city, people's perspective versus my experience is a little bit disconnected, and I want to make sure that that's not lost for what I'm looking for to feel safe and feel at peace. Again, I think we all want to feel safe, but everybody has a different idea of what that really means, and so those are beautiful things if you can, win and implement some real change, because that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for us to not just continue these conversations about all the resources that we have and things that we know we need to change from decades in the past, and how residents aren't living in certain places because they've been disenfranchised from the past. I want to see real change. That's why I'm here today. That's why I'm here interviewing you. That's why I'm interested in voting for you, and that's why I'm here as a resident, specifically as an African American male that is watching Black people get shot around me. So I look like those men. So to me, that traumatizes me. You know, I had a chance to actually go fishing. I wanted to tell you the story. I actually had a chance to go fishing with my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother. So when
That's amazing.
yeah, exactly, 3 great-grandmothers.
Yeah.
All from Louisiana, and all
Yeah.
fisherwomen. You know,
Yeah.
so I remember what they tell me, you better get your tackle box ready because we're gonna leave without you. So, you know, I grew up around women, you know. So, but what I wanted to say was that, you know, George being murdered just a few miles from me, it really traumatized me. That trauma took me way back. You know, so it's something that just opened up a wound that was already there, that was made it even deeper. So, you know, the racial issues that we have here nationally, and not even just nationally, but specifically here, I think that there's real opportunity. I think that you're a great candidate. I've been around town with you. I've seen you speak at a protest, and I like a lot of what you're saying. And I guess my other things is just making sure that, like I was saying about intention, like I got a chance to read about some of the other candidates, and I'm thinking, okay, there's a theme. Everybody is connected with the want to change and help community, but what are the plans? You know, so I think I've heard quite a bit from your plans. Is there anything else that you would want to add to like our community and really making change that you're passionate about, or that is really thriving you from your mission, like that Jerry Maguire moment, which was one of my favorite movies. You seen Jerry Maguire?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, that mission statement, it's like, hey, so that's what I always think about someone like you. Is like, you're standing up in front of people, you're standing up for yourself, you're willing to take hits from the public, from your views, and you can't please everybody. And you know, what's really going on in Alicia's head when it comes to like this change, you know, like in leadership,
Yeah, so when I sat down to, you know, launch this campaign, I was thinking about what would be my tagline.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of things. One of them I started out with, I don't have all the answers, but we do. And I still really, truly, that is kind of where I come from. That's really what I believe. But everybody around me was like, you know, like, that's not a great, you can't put that on a yard sign. Or also it's like, I can't do something, but you know, whatever. That was really, my husband in particular was like, no. So then we thought about it some more. And okay, if we come from the perspective of language as powerful, positive, my tagline I came up with, empowering community. And that really is 100% the reason why I am running, because I am done with the way that the city is operating from the top down without really listening to all of us that are here in an inclusive way, making promises, passing laws they don't even follow. What's up with that, right?
Yeah.
And whether it's policing or it's changing roads, you know, redesigning roads. I had a community conversation with a guy who does restorative justice facilitation, and you can, Manu Lewis, you can see on my website, and he doesn't live in our area, and he has not endorsed me, so I wouldn't say, I'm not dropping his name for that. I'm talking about, we had a great conversation.
Sure.
And
doing the work.
Yeah, and he, you know, at the end of that conversation, what we got to was like, look, you can come up with the right answers. But if you didn't bring the people with you, if you didn't do it the right way, then you still are replicating white supremacy.
Right.
Because white supremacy isn't just an outcome, it's a process. It's a way of doing business.
Right.
And it is a way of doing business that is saying, we've got the right ideas, and now we're going to implement them. And it's like, no. We might get there, but you need to do the work of bringing us all together. And that is what, you know, that's what empowering community means.
Absolutely. So I read your mission statement, if you will, and that's why I wanted to hear it from you too. So being here this morning, it's not just about interviewing you, it's about hearing it from you. And we've, you know, tried to get together numerous times, and being here, finally hearing it out of your mouth is you know, it's refreshing. Again, I'd like to see these things, you know, happen, you know, but, you know, especially, you know, in this city, I really believe that we have an opportunity. You know, I don't want to sound like that change is going to happen overnight, but we all have to be brought along in this process. Just like my friend Adam that owns Blue Ox Bakery. It's like, you can't just push people away because they're trying to help people that have a voice. And that's what I'm just tired of seeing that. You know, I'm tired of seeing those type of things. And back to my grandmothers. The reason why I brought up my grandmothers was that, you know, I still remember their stories in talking about racism. So imagine that, me being a little boy and hearing these stories, and then all these years and years, you know, I think back on how much it hurt to hear 3 women at times laugh and talk about how someone treated them ill. and yet and still they were still able to pick themselves up and have a good time. Those things just traumatized me, you know. So my point ultimately is not just as an African American male, but like, and you said this and tied it together too, is that we are all part of this process. And I'm one of those people that firmly feel that, like, if a gay person is being treated wrong across the street, we're all going to be affected. If they're not being treated equally, we're all being affected. If someone black is being treated racistly, we're not being, we're all being affected. So I just feel like I just want this inclusiveness with our community to really happen, and for those steps to really begin to be taken, change to really begin to happen, instead of the good old same thing that someone gets up there, not just you, and I didn't mean intention by you, I meant by all the candidates, is that we all have intentions. We're all humans, and some people may be empowered to actually make some change, and you are in the position to do that. So that's why I feel that coming here and talking with you and people getting a chance to hear from you is a good ideal for them to tap into, and yeah.
Yeah, and it's an overwhelming time. This is a moment, I think, of historical reckoning, of generations, of racism and trauma.
Right.
But I would not be running if I was not hopeful.
Right.
And I'm hopeful in part because I've spent my life studying even worse traumas. Well, I wouldn't say worse, but really big traumas. Genocide of entire communities, atomic bomb. Taking out entire cities, and human beings are resilient. And we can, I really believe we can recover. We can not only, it's not about going back to a past, but we can make something better out of this. And if I did not believe that, I would not be running.
Yeah, I think I believe you.
And like you said, now it's like, can you actually make it happen, right? And that's why I think it's important that that we have leaders who know about institution building.
Well, it's not make it happen. It's getting those footsteps started.
And exactly,
doing the work.
And it's going to take time. People aren't going to understand. There's going to have to be some patience. But make it happen in terms of, okay, how do we set the foundation for making this happen, right? We need institution builders. We need, consensus builders. We need peace builders.
Yeah, and we also need to make sure that we keep including some of our, like I was saying earlier, to me, and it's not because I'm not in a good position in life, because I'm blessed and privileged. I feel that I am privileged, but I'm constantly thinking about the people that are in need and the issues that are in need that we don't address, because everyone gets up there and they get into their position of power, and a lot of things are put on their table, and the things that are most needed to be addressed and the issues that are the biggest constantly fall off.
Yeah.
So I think that we've discussed it, and you hit it on the head, and I think that if you get the opportunity, you'll make some movement on it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Marcus, for coming here and doing this with me.
Thank you, Alicia.